right, dude. I think it must be triathlon season.
Dude, it feels like it. The sun's going to be out later tonight. It's going to be warm. People are racing this weekend. I mean, people have been racing, but yeah, it's we're inching closer and closer. It is March 11th, the year. Yeah, it's 2025. Welcome aboard, everybody. Listen to Crushing Iron Podcast. This is episode 837.
Right. Yeah. Enough of the winter doldrums. Let's get your head out of your ass and let's go.
Yeah, seriously. And if it's still a little bit chilly, just get over it. Because listen, we're this close. We're pretty much mid-May, spring break for a lot of people. It's time. So let's if we get a little bit of cold, appreciate it, because you know what? This is like the time of year where we just complain no matter what the weather. Unless it's like 45 to 50, it's either too hot or the cold comes back. Let's just embrace it. It's going to be changing every single day. It's going to be kind of like, I mean, I feel like it's here in the Midwest too, but remember when we lived in Nashville, people always said, like, if you don't like the weather, stick around, because it's like always changing. Like last week, the kids were going late to school because of a blizzard, and then by Thursday it was 70. I mean, and yesterday it was like high 70s. I mean, it's like, sure, it's like, what am I wearing today? Just bring all your clothes, layer it up, take the layers off, and enjoy it, because it's where people are coming out of the house doing more things. People had a couple people doing the spring yard work action over the weekend. There's the first kind of like, I can get out there and pick up some sticks, maybe get some debris off the lawn, clean up the flower beds, and then everybody shelled on Monday because like they do the yard work and that's not using all the muscles that they usually work. So yeah, I had a lot of sore people that first, like, this warm weekend, a lot of sore people that are out of the landscaping shape.
Yeah. And back to that, if you stick around, the weather will change. I think everybody uses that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think that's every region.
What state you live in, that's like everybody's go-to.
If you don't like Toledo, stick around a minute.
This is what you know what that is?
What?
Not everyone says that. Old people say that. That is what.
Oh yeah, we do.
Old people say. Yeah, I am officially one of those. Sweet. I'm glad we covered that. But no, we're inching closer and closer to the beginning of the race season. Got Puerto Rico 70.3 this weekend. Got a couple T100 races coming up. Oceanside 70.3, Texas 70.3. I mentioned this in my weekly email. There is the last, like, what I think 2 to 4 years since COVID, a lot of people were kind of like maybe a little bit pessimistic on, like the growth of the sport. And while I think we've all seen, right, a shrinking in the amount of Ironman races, and I even think like a shrinking in the participant kind of like thresholds and what they consider like a sellout at these races. Having said that, the 70.3s, I think this year there will be more people participating in 70.3s across the globe than any other year in the sport. I mean, everywhere I look, there's races that are either already sold out. Oceanside's got, I think, 3,000 plus and that's for a race that's been around that's one of the iconic, like, original 70 point. It used to be a Kona qualifier. I mean, it is like one of the longest standing iconic races, and for that to be so, I mean, to me that's just a great sign for the health of the sport. And I also think listen, as much as we like to rip on, Ironman as a quote unquote a brand or a business or whatever, I think listening to their customers and their consumers and seeing like, hey, I think the writing's kind of been on the wall. I think people are kind of prioritizing things a little bit differently. Ironman was so huge. Not that many people doing 70.3s. A lot of people like swinging big, doing the bucket list thing. And then you know how it is. Like you train for an Ironman, and obviously it's really extending the bandwidth of your time and your energy across family life, spouse life, work, free time. Like it just stretches you thin. And then all of a sudden you like. You had the old, another quote. I'm just doing a 7.3 this year. I'm just doing 7, just doing Olis. And you're like, I could do this training in my sleep compared to like what it was before. And I think it fits into people's life better. You're not destroyed for 2 weeks afterwards. You can like even drive home, which is not our favorite, but a lot of people like to drive home right after the race and get back to work. I mean, I think they've listened. They've increased the amount of 70.3s that they have across the U.S., across the globe, and people are. I mean, they're sold out all over the place. So I think it's great for the sport. I think it really, again, like if we talk about barrier to entry in the sport, I mean, it's always when people hear triathlon, because to me it's always a messaging problem. People hear triathlon, they think Ironman. And how long do I have to go? Like you could only go. You can do a 200-meter swim, a 5-mile bike, and a mile run, and that's a triathlon. But everyone hears triathlon, they hear Ironman, they hear Kona, right? Which is the worst question. Well, most of us get, right? They're like, hey, I do Ironman. Like, have you done Kona? And you're like, no, I haven't. Thanks for making me feel good for 2 seconds and then making me feel terrible and slow afterwards. But no, I think it's. I mean, I know this. I'm not sure about your specific athlete roster, but I know mine. It's the sellout percentages here, at least here in the U.S. for 70.3s is represented very fairly in also the race schedules of the athletes that I work with. It is 70.3, 70.3, 70.3 sprints, Olympics, the occasional, Ironman here and there, but it has gone more towards that. And I love it because I think, again, it lowers the barrier of entry for people from a time standpoint, from an investment standpoint. And most importantly, if you're going to be in the sport for a while, it really benefits you on a development standpoint from focusing on the basics and not feeling rushed and not overdoing it with ridiculous volume and extending yourself too far and becoming really, establishing patterns that are just slow and incorrect. Instead, you can just kind of go shorter and faster and really, really build that engine, that chassis before you decide to go long. So anyway, that was a long-winded intro into the start of the race season, but I think it's good across the board. I think it's great for the sport and great for everyone involved.
Yeah, man, you love it. Yeah. No, I agree. That's it's interesting because it is sort of like that natural inclination to, say I want to do an Ironman, but it is a better route, I think, to kind of build up slow. I mean, I personally went a little probably fast for my britches, but it's one of those things, man. Yeah, it's like it is weird how you can kind of 70.3. I'll just do that. I remember back when I started, I was doing an Olympic over there at Rev, and there was a 70.3 going on at the same time, and I when I got done, I was watching those people turn around for the next loop. I'm like, what? That seems like ridiculous to me. So, I guess what I'm getting at is that 70.3 is no joke either, really, for most people.
No.
So I don't think, I think that's a tendency we have. I mean, I used to do that with Ironman. I just did when I could do one in my sleep. But it'll bite you. So I think you got to, be ready for a 70.3 too.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing is to me, it always comes down to pick the race that you feel is the best race for you to do in terms of either one, how it fits into your life or what you want to get out of the year. And if you want to go long, right? But does it fit in your life correctly? Or does going short? And triathletes especially, because they get stuck in the FOMO, they get stuck in this repetitive cycle, the same Ironmans every year, and that's all they want to do, and all they're doing is chasing, beating their time. They find themselves, being steady Eddie across their rate. They might, toggle between a 13:30 and a 13:40 for 3 or 4 years in a row. When all they probably really need to do is take a step back and spend a year, maybe getting a little bit stronger, maybe, trying to go a little bit faster, getting more speed, and then going longer again. And then you're going to break your Ironman streak, but at least you're going to be faster the next time you do one, because it comes down to.
Are you talking to me right now? I think you are.
No, I'm not. I'm not talking to you right now.
It's okay, dude. Get back to sprints.
You've been like that since you started the sport. But I mean, a lot of people get in that trap. Like it's just interesting. They feel like, and it's ridiculous. Like but I also get it. At the same time, it's ridiculous. I also get it because you're like, man, we always, I think we're all addicts at nature to some degree. I mean, it's like going more, going harder, going longer, right? I mean, I think that's those kind of traits are just inherent in most triathletes' DNA. That's just who they are. Rarely ever, and maybe it's just the way that we program, but rarely ever have I had an athlete be like, hey, I think we should go a little bit easier and a little bit softer and a little bit, and maybe a little bit shorter in the volume. It's always like, I need more. I need more pain. Be harder on me. Give me more volume. Give me more intensity. I don't feel like this is hard enough. Then you're like, that's not, how we get better. But like, that's just that's in their DNA. That's just who most triathletes are. And so you're always doing one while looking for the more. And obviously in triathlon, Ironman is the more. But with that choice becomes an enormous amount of increased volume for the age grouper, right? And when it comes to professionals, like if you listen to a lot of the professionals talk that have come from the short course background, some of them I've legit heard two that they just crushed 70.3s last year. They said they actually do less volume now in doing 70.3s than they did doing ITU. So sprint and Olympic, they were doing more volume then, overall volume, than they were doing 70.3s this year. They dialed their volume back, which is insane to think about, because you can do as much volume as you want across all sports, right? And across all distances. But for the age grouper who has more responsibilities, you're more than likely in a relationship of some kind. You may or may not have kids. You more than likely definitely have like a serious job. All this extra stress, right? And all this extra time you get to navigate through. It's a big commitment. And so when you get in these ruts, you get in these cycles, I think we just forget like how, again, hard is relative, stress is relative, great is relative, poor. I mean, it's all relative to you, right? And I think you can, if you ask someone, hey, would you rather go 20 minutes all out or 2.5 hours medium? You might be splitting hairs here between the people who participate in the sport. Some would want to go all out for 20 minutes and be done. They want to go 95%. They want to be bleeding after like 2 minutes and sweating and like cotton mouthing it. And the other one's like, you know what? I'm good just being steady Eddie for 2.5. Slight burn, not too sizzling, but just about right. So like there's a lot of ways to stimulate things. There's a lot of ways to be excited. But what happens is most people get stuck in this rut when, kind of like you said, like you said, you got a little bit out of your britches, but that's 90% of triathletes, right? As coaches, we know this. Like, hey, I'm interested in getting coaching. I'm looking to do, my first triathlon this year. Here's proposed race calendar. It's like 7.3, 2 fulls. You're like, here we go, right? You're like, maybe. Wait a minute. Are you in this for like 8 months? Or are you in this for a couple of years where you really want to get the most out of yourself and develop and be like the best? And that's, so like you have to, I think you manage that as an athlete. Obviously, you have to manage that as a coach, but going shorter has never really hurt anyone if they're looking towards the next year, right? Even in the short curve of like trying to get better within the year, fast, and you get the fast, make your fast go far is a quote that you hear a lot. Go fast, then go far. Because if you just worry about going far, a lot of times you just don't develop the engine and the type of physiology you want to be at your prime, right? Because then at the end of the day, it's how fast you can make it from point A to point B. Yes, there's a lot of ways to get there, but getting stuck in that cycle of, Ironman, it's tough. And then you get addicted to it because you're not seeing progress, or you want to see more progress, and you're like, I don't want to go down 70.3, because then again, it's also tough because if you don't do 70.3s, you only do fulls, you kind of lost your baseline of what do I need to do to get better, right? Or what do I need to compare? Like you don't have that. If you've done a 7.3 in 3 or 4 years, and I'm going to train for 7.3, you're like, well, I only have done one in like 4 or 5 years, so what's kind of going to be my goal time? Do I have kind of a carrot out there? I know I can finish it because I do a bunch of fulls. So is it just getting faster? And where does that speed come from? So I think weaving those in consistently, sprints, Olympics, is a great way to just not just get faster, right? And develop the way you should, but it's also nice to keep carrying those carrots over year after year after year and give yourself something to shoot for. Because if you're only shooting for that full distance, I don't know anybody that only does a full a year and continues to get better. I think it's really, really hard and very, very challenging to approach your year that way.
Damn, you are talking to me.
I know. I feel like I'm hitting you hard right now. But I'm not.
He's nailing me, man. Oh, shit. Well, I mean, there's a lot of truth there. I get it, Sometimes I just think I'm at a point where it's sort of my yearly challenge, it's sort of. But you're right. I get kind of stubborn with it, and I try to play the tweaks and figure these things out, and it just hasn't been going that well for me lately. But yeah, maybe I ought to just well, that one year, did I have a good year? Because I trained for Chat 70.3, but I actually wasn't signed up. So maybe that's the way to do it, is just act like I'm doing a 70.3 and train for it and then do an Ironman. Because I'm kind of that, I'm not the volume guy for sure. So I don't have a problem with that. But
yeah, and well, I mean, again, like I think you also have to understand, some people, which is totally fine. Like you use it, at least recently, I feel like, more as to just continue to have something and a goal, something to shoot for, something to challenge you, something to get you out of your comfort zone every year.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people do that. Like they don't have the energy or the desire to maybe put in the extra work that they want, that they know they need to do to get better. But what they still want to do is they still want to be involved in the sport. They still want to treat their body right. They still want to push themselves. They still want that challenge because of what it does for them in other areas of their life. And I think that's 100% fine and encouraged, because it's sure it's hell better than doing nothing. Like if you're, to most people, it sounds crazy. most people like, hey, I just want to do like a half marathon each year. You're like, yeah, I think I'll just do a full Ironman every year for the last decade. Like they're like, you're nuts. But for most triathletes who've been in the sport for a while, you say that and you're like, that's all you're doing this year? Which we have a warped sense of like what is an accomplishment and what is, maybe an endurance event or what requires extra stress or extra hours or extra effort. But it's still, because to me, no matter what, it gets harder every year especially to do the same things, which I think is probably why a lot of people like switching it up sometimes, is because doing the same things every year sometimes can get so monotonous. Sometimes you can get you feel like you know what to do all the time to get it done. You don't have that extra jolt that's like, you know what, I don't really know how this is going to go, so I may have to turn the dial a little bit. I may have to change it up a little bit. And I think it would. I honestly think most, I don't want to say short distance athletes. Well, that's not true. I think for the short distance athletes that I work with that like to go short and hard, I'm talking like super sprints, Olympics. And I'm talking like, we're talking fast, like all out. We're talking sub 6 minute, pace on the runs, and for sprints and Olympics. If you talk to them about doing Ironman, they're like, no, thanks. Like I see no desire to do that. Not just the training, but the race itself. And then if you ask most long distance athletes, 70.3 is like, hey, how about this weekend you just go all out for a 500 meter swim, go over 100% FTP for 25, 30 minutes on bike, and then go crush a 5K. They'd be like, can I just do a 4-hour easy ride instead? Like they don't want any part of it. And again, like, so there's like a mutual fear and mutual respect of like both distances, but I think both could learn a lot from the other in terms of pushing themselves out of their comfort zone and doing things that are different and like incredibly challenging, right? Because we all have these different relative versions of what we believe is challenging and not challenging, and can making sure you're. And again, I think it all comes in like just staying sharp, like with that competitive side and that competitive nature. Like I think we've watered down the competitive nature of all things, because to try to make things more easy for everybody, which I think is like, if you're like a high performing person, you're looked at as like too serious now. Or if you like challenges, you're thought of as over the top, or you're always looking for the ways to get better and to push yourself and make yourself uncomfortable, and you're seen as kind of extreme. Like that's how we are supposed to be. Like that's how we're supposed to live. To do things that are uncomfortable, to do things that are extreme, to test our limits, to test our boundaries, to do things that scare us. It's not to kick back in our fucking recliner and eat, Frito-Lays and count going for a 30-minute walk as exercise for the day. That's extreme, right? The extreme level of being sedentary and lazy. That is the level of extreme, and being comfortable and doing absolutely nothing. But that's now like the par for the course, at least here in America. And if you do anything else, you're like, there's that crazy person out at 5:30 a.m. in the morning doing their run, and then you have this line of people who who had that and they're like, that sounds terrible. And you're like, does it? So take care of myself, improve myself mentally, emotionally, physically. That sounds terrible to you? You know, getting out of my comfort zone and growing, doing things that scare me, meeting great people, being a part of that seems too extreme for you. Well, then
Yeah.
if it is, then color me extreme, because I think that's how we're supposed to live. But I think when taking the comparison out from people who do sports or who don't do sports or don't have those things to push themselves, like even within our sport, we tend to hide and make excuses to not do certain things, certain types of workouts, right? I'm just not good at that. It's not my thing. And I'm like, well, that tells me you need more of it. Because if it's not your thing, it means you probably didn't put your all in, or you didn't feel like you're good enough at it. If you weren't good enough at it, we need to do more of it. But we like to hide behind these excuses about that's not for me, or I don't feel like this. Sometimes you just got to go and you got to put yourself through the ringer, a lot of times just to kind of raise your bar of what you thought was possible, or to just learn more about the areas you need to improve on, whether it's a 20-minute all out or whether it's 3 hours easy. Again, you're going to be splitting hairs between what someone's going to pick and what the other one isn't. And it might differ on day to day. And it also requires a tremendous, difference, a different amount of bandwidth. Like you have a low stress load day, not a lot of time, then go for the 20-minute all out. You got a high stress load, plenty of time, go for the 3 hours easy. And I think a lot of times if you look at your year and look at how again, you can't predict life stress, but a lot of times if we look back in, our training calendar and our periods of success or periods of where we lack success or lack consistency, a lot of times they all fall around the same stuff. Maybe it's February, March, you kind of get a little bit of seasonal depression. Maybe it's busy time, the end of school year. Like we've all got these periods where you've got more obstacles and the opportunity for more excuses than others. And so maybe you change things up then, but just sticking to what's comfortable, just sticking to what you've always done is a fantastic recipe to continue getting the same results you always have. But the kicker is time waits for no one. So if you're continuing to do the same thing and you're continuing the same result, you're going to have some sort of performance degradation there, to where your same is not going to be the same on the clock. It's going to keep going down and down and down. And to me, that screams change.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was just kind of thinking about what you're saying. I was writing the other day, and in this sport, you got a lot of athletes, I'm sure, like there's a lot of athletes that are kind of like, I just got to make sure I can go the distance. I can, make the distance. And at some point, that's never like a fear of mine anymore, but I get it, certain points, it's like, yeah, I just got to make sure I can do this. And then, it goes back to when we used to swim train at the lake. And after about halfway through the summer, I'm like, dude, we're not even really going that. It's like we got to swim 4,400 yards and we're doing these like 2,000 open waters, but we were just blasting it all the time. Hundreds hard, 100, 200 hard or whatever, out around the buoys, this kind of thing. And we're just like swimming really hard and getting after it. And that's the part that I've been missing. Not only in swimming, but we used to go to the trace and ride hard, and I'd go to the lab and blast it out. I wasn't putting in massive volume all the time, obviously, but I was like, that was just sort of how we did things. And, it felt good. It wasn't crushing us as much, but it was that exposure. Sort of like every time I see a trainer ride now, I used to be a lot more aggressive with it, and now I'm kind of just sort of going through it. Or if I'm out riding a long ride, I used to just kind of, we talked about it before, but, hammering the hills, getting after it a little bit and then recovering. And, it's just an interesting dynamic, as long as we've been around the sport and seen so many people, but, this whole idea of just kind of cruising all day just to see if you can get, the mileage in, is definitely part of it. But I think a lot of times, it's certainly in my case, I feel like I'm just not stretching myself and feeling that, that a little bit of discomfort, as much as I should. And that's just that's a learned habit too. And it's sort of like, well, if you just train enough at volume and, sure, you'll be able to get it done. But, it's for me, I just was thinking again, I was like, I need to re-raise my ceiling, because it's sort of like that Cadillac analogy. That's a powerful car, but it's also fast. And, if you hammer it down, it gets going. It's kind of like a Derrick Henry, big, powerful running back with good speed or something like that. You need to have both, and you don't get there without, challenging yourself. And I think it's easy to kind of get trapped in this endurance world where we're just kind of lollygagging along all the time and just putting in a lot of time on our feet, which is great, but it's the other part. You're not stretching your boundaries. You're not feeling that explosiveness, and it's just basic physics, I guess. With your muscles, they have to be, you have to challenge them. You have to stretch it out a little bit, and and push yourself. So that's where I'm at. I'm kind of thinking about that same thing, and I think you're right. It is kind of hard, I guess, if you're not thinking about a race. And I used to do an Olympic, a half, and then a full. And it was always kind of that perfect. I always talk about that as the perfect way to do it, almost for me anyway. Is it because you're just really kind of getting after that Olympic and, kind of almost all sprint. And then a half is sort of similar. And then, by the time we talk about it, really well-trained, legit trained athlete for a 70.3 is pretty good in a full, at that point. So that's kind of the angle I've been thinking about lately too.
Well, and I think it represents a great opportunity to really gauge like where you are on understanding, your effort and your pacing across all disciplines and across all zones. Because the more you do, I firmly believe like the more often you go long, the lower your ceiling gets when it comes to being able to fully understand, where you are, on the scale of pain and like on the scale of your threshold, because you don't go there enough.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, and again, there's different pain, right? Like, and there's in the, in an Ironman, oftentimes the pain is from the waist down. And then a short distance, oftentimes the majority of pain is from the waist up, right? It's in the lungs and the heart. You're absolutely redlining it. It's more anaerobic. It's more limited by your respiratory rate and like, your heart rate and your ability and capacity. And then Ironman, most people I don't think I've ever seen anyone like I can't go any faster. I'm going too fast. My legs are, won't keep up with my my legs are fine. That's my heart rate. In a full, it's always their legs are crumbling underneath them, and they are relegated to just a walk. It's two very different things, but you don't train it, you don't know it. And I think it's just a really interesting thing for us to always, keep in mind is that, having these, we always talk about having zones and having a feel for, what feels like what in these pace ranges, and is understanding the importance of all, right? The importance of zone 1, zone 2, the importance of zone 5, zone 6, the importance of, race pace zones in between and threshold and across all three disciplines. But if you don't have that and you don't do it enough, you lose touch of it, you lose sight of it. And just like, feel for the water. And if you don't at least touch it, right, at some point every couple of weeks, it gets really, really difficult. And that's why I think a lot of times it's just really hard to, when athletes, or maybe prospective athletes, want to quiz about, what kind of training do you do? Do you do, threshold training? Do you do more polarized, right? Which is just really, really high intensity. And then, zone 1, zone 2, do you do more pyramidal, which is kind of like everything in between? It's more evenly spread out. To me, it's like, yes, you have periods of the year where you want to have, one or the other, but a lot of times, like I tend to be more, I think, on the pyramidal side. So your training intensity looks more, I obviously, like a pyramid. Like get zone 5 and 6 at the top, the smallest little thing, but then you still get time in all the zones down to zone 1. So, kind of, displays like a triangle, where, versus like polarized, which is like, most people would say it's 80% of your training is done below, LT1 or, middle to zone 2. And then everything else is above threshold. And so there's not anything in between. I at least this time of year, I like going hard across all the disciplines, because I think if you don't, you kind of lose that, you lose sight and feel of what of kind of, like that touching that part of the stove. I think you got to remind yourself, what it feels like to go these things and what it feels like to go hard. And I feel like you do need to have a higher, yes, it changes as you go longer, but you need to, I think, always kind of keep a level of sharpness when it comes to your pain tolerance and your ability to manage discomfort. And I think we get we've gotten way too used to just managing discomfort by only doing things that make us comfortable, or just running away from discomfort and making things as comfortable as possible, not, leaning into things that we're not good at. And that, like we at the hub this last weekend, we had some collegiate teams come in for a little hub invitational, had three D2 and D3 women's teams come in. We did a swim, 200-meter swim or 200-yard swim, and then a 5-mile route on Zwift, and then a little 1,000-meter run. And they did a couple heats back to back to back. And you're hearing the distance. You're like, that's nothing. But then when you watch them, because it's all pretty, besides like the run, it's all and you can see everyone because they're kind of in a controlled environment, and then especially when they're hopping on this hard 5-mile route on Zwift, and they're just going absolutely as hard as they can for 15 minutes after an all-out swim. There wasn't any part of me that was like, you know what, that doesn't look that bad because it's so short. It was like, that looks really, 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 really hard and very, very challenging. And it's going to be even more challenging if you don't ever touch that area of effort. And then if you go these lengths of time without touching a certain part of the effort, then when you are required to do the effort, it's probably not going to be as high as the effort that you want because you've lost touch with what that truly feels like. And most not all, but a lot of triathletes, if you're thinking they're 100%, they're probably going to go 89 to 95 because they're afraid that they don't really know what that all out feels like, unless you have a very prescribed zone, unless they're more accustomed to or likely to always go over, which there's plenty of those too, right? You give them a range of 200, 240, and there you can look at their average on the laps and it's 240, 242. They always got to go at the top end of the range, not necessarily means because of the best, but that's because that's how they're wired, right? More and harder is always better. But I think when we avoid that, I think that I think we lower we decrease our ability to understand what it feels like to be under stress or be uncomfortable or be or have certain levels of pain. And I think that type of stuff, again, not all the time, not every day, but I think that kind of stuff we need to be reminded of that. And the more we stay away from it, just like consistency with training, like the more consistent you are, the more likely you are to be consistent when you wake up today. The more inconsistent you are, the more likely you are to be inconsistent when you wake up today. That's just behavior. That's just pattern. That's just momentum versus no momentum. And the same goes for if you're used to kind of touching the ceiling and going high because you've done it, once or twice a month, you're going to be able to really, really maybe touch the ceiling. But if you're not, your ceiling's probably going to be a couple inches, maybe a foot lower than we want it to be when we go there the next time because you're just not used to what it feels like.
Yeah. And that's not easy, man. It is a habit, man, though. I think it's really weird because you can kind of get stuck in that playing along with the game a little bit and not really testing it out. And, it's building habits, creating that feeling more often. And it's just, I don't know, man, life is so much about breaking out of comfort zones and exploring and experimenting. And I think a lot of times people will get too aggressive right out of the gate, but it's something that needs to be built up just like everything else. And that's why I always tell people to just kind of like, if they're going to go all out and they haven't gone all out in a while, make sure that's just, 7, 8 or whatever, but build up. And, maybe it even can happen for me in the course of a workout, right? Cause I always kind of like, if I'll see maybe, a dozen intervals or something on the bike, and my first few, I'll kind of just stretch it a little bit, but it's really weird how, it's the old, man, that first mile felt like shit. And then you start feeling really good. And then by mile 7, you start feeling even better. So I think there's your body remembers it. It's just that you have to kind of prime it a little bit sometimes. And that's just sort of how I go about everything, because I'm not the guy that can get out of bed and just start ripping it. That will destroy me. And I think a lot of times I'll try to do that and it always bite me. But and that's weird how even, we go to run camp or something and I won't even start like feeling awake until the second loop sometimes. Not this year, of course, but like it's one of those things where I don't know what's going on in the body with me, but I think it's always in there. I just have to give it a shot, give it a chance to warm up. And I think that even if that's just a few times, it's sort of priming the pump at the end of your workout or when you're feeling really good. And those are the other moments I look for, is like, man, I feel real good for whatever reason. Now's the time to actually kind of explore it, because you can tell, you have a sense for when your body is feeling really good or when, things are going well. And that's when I like to explore the top ends a little bit more rather than forcing them. But I still need to force the middle end and force the top end a little bit more after that, because, if you just kind of always hang out in sort of Easyville and then try to turn it up, it's not always going to happen. So it is just a matter of building a habit, I think. And that's what I miss about having hills around here, is that hills to me were always the great place to do it. And I always love going up hills hard and then recovering over them, no matter if it's running or cycling. And that's the other thing, like with having a lake here, it's sort of like I get in the habit of kind of just getting in there and going long, rather than blasting it a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think in one of the most interesting things, right, as a coach, is to kind of, because some intervals, and I think it's one of the hardest things, I think, to define or kind of sift through as a coach, is like, if some athletes, to me, at least for me, and this might not be true for all coaches, but a lot of times I have a hard time discerning on what interval is best for an athlete, because you have athletes that really succeed at shorter intervals, but they do them so well, and they can do them so well. Sometimes they go too hard and they're left shelled, because that's also, you're kind of combining their favorite with what they're best at. And while that might seem like the perfect recipe for the perfect interval, that oftentimes, and you can give them you can rein them in, and you can give them as many guardrails as possible, but doesn't mean they're going to listen, right? And you can't catch them till it's afterwards. So if you combine like a workout that's their best, that they're best at, and then with the one that's their favorite, and then they have like a lot of juice that day, then you might be looking at 2 to 3 to 4 days of recovery, because they just, of easier, zone 2 style workouts, because they just absolutely crush themselves because they're loving every minute of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other athletes where, you give them, a session and they go into it and it also crushes them in a different way. Not crushes them, it's dramatic, but like in it really, they need like, 48, 72 hours, because not just because of the session and what you asked of them, but because of the mental fatigue from doing the session. You're combining the mental fatigue with the physical fatigue in a hard workout. And then what's taking them, because they had to dig that deep mentally, where's the biggest level of fatigue coming from? Where do they need the biggest break from? Or you give someone, something where they both hate the workout, they're not engaged in it because they don't think they're good at it, and they aren't good at it. Then what do you get out of it? Well, a lot of times you don't get that much out of it. You get not that much. You get something out of it. But as a coach, when you're looking at like that recipe of what's going to allow them to bounce back tomorrow, depending on what their level of like restraint is, sometimes it's like, all right, well, you don't like this workout, you're not good at it, but we know you need more of it, so I'm going to give it to you again, because I also know you're not going to go smoke yourself and you're going to be back at it the next day. Or they do it and they're like, I'm chomping the bed after yesterday. So like, it's a really interesting, I think, thing to look at when you are, trying to figure out, what's best and how athletes respond and what's going to get them where they want to go. I think it's so much, it's just as much psychological as it is physiological. And I think like managing that response, not just the stress response, which is what most people talk about only, is like the physical stress response, is managing the emotional, mental response from the workout. An athlete that I don't know in the 8 years we worked together has ever complained about a workout, ever. And I gave him this workout and he just said, went hard, yada, yada, but wasn't a fan of this one, would prefer never to do again. And I said, it was a lot of it had to do with like electronic shifting and on, was on the right Zwift course. And I'm like, that sounds like a personal problem and a workout problem. And I just said, I can see this. This is a great set. I'll tweak it a smidge next week. So as a coach, you're thinking, well, I know this is great for you, but if you're going to go into it already hating it, then to me, your barrier, your ability to go hard is already lessened. Right? And it's already low because they're dreading the workout itself. So they, just like we talked about, 2 weeks ago about getting in the pool, the longer you wait to do it, the colder it's going to get. And so, like, again, it's like there's so much when it comes to training prescription and like what you're putting in that you have to kind of, it's a combined, to me at least, and I know you'd agree, it's like that psychological plus physiological combination of like what's going to leave them ready to bounce back versus what's necessary versus what's going to keep them going. It's a never-ending puzzle, obviously, too, because athletes change their mind, every other workout, compared to what they want to do with their year, what their race schedule is, but keeping them fresh enough, but also setting them up for success. And it's really hard to balance, and it's impossible to see in the data. Like you can't tell what their heart rate, when you look at the heart rate graph or the power or cadence or whatever, and whatever files you download or whatever platform you use, like you can't see what that was doing to them mentally. And yes, they can leave great comments and great feedback, but it's still challenging sometimes to kind of see how the cumulative effect of it, and you have to be aware of that, as a coach, and kind of reading between the lines of what, yes, are repeatable workouts fantastic? Yes, because the athletes execute them better because they know how to execute things they've done before. They know how to pace, and they know how hard they can go. They know what to expect, so they can execute it. And it gives you a point to measure, right? If it's not repeatable, it's hard to measure. But if it's one where they're like having to dig deep, to some point, again, it's just like touching a hot stove. They're like, yeah, this one's wearing me out mentally because it's just hard. Then you're like, you know what? Maybe we take a break from this. Maybe we allow them to kind of have some freedom, and then we go from there. But I think it's just really, really hard to manage that psychological and that physiological piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you were talking, I was kind of thinking back to that discomfort zone and whatever, and how really back in the day too, there's a lot of training that we did, and we would kind of swim with swimmers and run with runners and bike with cyclists a lot. And it's that sort of like, sometimes I'll have an athlete come and say, yeah, I ran with a friend today. He's so much faster than me, but he was cool keeping it down. But I think it's always great to me, that run, with other people, training with other people. And that's kind of what I think a lot of us tend to sort of miss as we stay in the sport longer, is that idea of really training with somebody faster than you and better than you, and kind of realize and helping them, or they can help you realize, I guess, your potential a little bit more. And the more you do it, the more it just becomes natural. Certain people just go out and break it down, and you can go out and at least try. And if you can kind of do it and hang with them a little bit, you have more in the tank. And I think it's just, they help you pull it out. And if you're sort of living in your own world, like, kind of I have been, it's sort of almost difficult to go into the tank like that. So that is just such a huge factor to me. Run with runners, swim with swimmers, and bike with cyclists. And you're going to get better. It's just one of those things where you can almost by, what's that called? When you sleep, osmosis. Kind of pick up things or whatever. And the next thing you know, it's really weird too, because I think that, you spend a few sessions running with people that are faster, biking, especially biking, I think sometimes, because you can hang with it a little bit longer probably, but you push yourself, and the next thing you know, that's your big gain, right? And a lot of times I think it does come down to, just sort of breaking down your own boundaries with the help of other people.
Yeah, and right. I think it's one of the biggest challenges in a sport that is so isolating, right? Is that we get, I think we underestimate how exhausting it is to be caught up in our own heads all the time, and always thinking about ourselves and our own internal competition versus some kind of external competition. and just letting that go and letting those kind of competitive juices fly, or going hard, and what is hard versus, what is hard alone versus hard with others. And I think it's really interesting, like, because every research paper out there will tell you that people go their hardest when they're around other people.
Yeah.
Like they truly go all out. They get the most. Your max is different just like if I said, all right, Mike, go run a 5K alone versus go run a 5K in a race, you would be significantly faster than 5K in the race.
Yeah.
It's just that much easier to go harder, right? Especially someone like you who gets so much more juice from the crowd. And so, like, as a coach, when you look at that, you think, all right, well, do I then take your race numbers and apply them to your training? Because on one end, you're thinking, yes, because that's the true limit of your abilities right now, where we see you as a performer. But you were in your race carbon shoes, and you were with other people, and you were tapered. So should I take all those into account and then say, yes, you're according to, here's an example, like you're according to your latest 5K, 10K, whatever it is, right? With all those extras, your new threshold pace is whatever, 720s. Well, now you're going to go into training where you're fatigued more often. You're not wearing your fancy carbon plated shoes every workout. You're not surrounded by people and external motivation in the race setting. That 720 is going to feel a lot. So now what do you do with your zones? Now, how do you measure that unless you want to measure it every single day? That's really, really difficult. And that's why I find it hard to, like, when you have an athlete, it's like, yeah, this is how I ride. This is how I ride for this. This is how I ride alone. This is how I ride on Zwift. This is how I ride with my buddies. A lot of times they're just all over the place. And I just think it's, like, really interesting when you go out and you see someone, like, produce so much more power. Again, like, you get outside power versus inside power. And they'll go out or they'll go in a group ride and they're like, yeah, I was just flying today. I wasn't feeling anything. I was just in the zone. And you're like, can I hate them on that? And I can't even say, like, did you go too hard? Because let's say they're 25, 30 watts higher than their inside alone ride. That might be the same. Right? Because they were outside, easier to produce power. They were with people. They were energized. They were mentally in it. They weren't in their, basement dungeon alone on their trainer trying to mash out their gears. Sometimes there might be a higher stress response from that solo effort indoors with no support, no external motivating factors, not outside, with a 20-watt lower ride than there would have been with the outside ride that might have been longer and harder with people outdoors. And again, like, when we get so into the weeds about, looking through numbers and data and crunching this and having this ready for the next workout, it's just, to me, all those things are, like, just really interesting things for us all to think about when we're trying to figure out what's best and where are we, but also just how different every session is and every different environment across all things, when so many athletes are just so overly obsessed with comparing every workout all the time. And some workouts come easy, some workouts don't. And I think when we kind of peel back the layers and try to ask, what was the limiting factor here? It was X, Y, and Z. Or what was the, promoting factor here that made me feel good about going in the session, so therefore it was better? A lot of times it isn't physical. A lot of times it's just mental and emotional. I'm going through less, I can perform better. I'm going through more, it's harder to perform the same level. I'm indoors versus outdoors. People, solo versus alone. Or you could, same thing, you could say, well, you're inside, training alone, doing a Zwift route, against quote unquote virtual people, and you're working hard. And then all of a sudden I put 2 trainers on each side of you with your buddies, and you can see them on their screen. And then what's going to happen? You're going to work harder, right? You're going to be able to produce bigger power. And so it's like, it's just weaving all those in and out and then trying to, peel back what works, what doesn't work, where we really are. It's just, it's so much more complicated than, the apples to apples comparison that most athletes think, all numbers and all data come from.
Yeah. And I think back to when we would all go out and ride Natchez Trace in Nashville, and my mindset before that was always like, shit. You know, we would say, yeah, we're just gonna go out and ride, 4 hours or whatever. But I think subconsciously I knew that we were just gonna blast it, So it always had sort of this different edge to it, and because we would always, kind of act like we were just gonna ride, but then eventually somebody would just take over and it'd be this thing. So I do think that, we can kind of, it's so much more comforting to know you're going to go out and ride by yourself and hang at your own pace and do whatever you want. But sometimes that push is what you need, and it's just a little uncomfortable. But it's definitely, part of training and part of racing better, that you have to explore that and feel that. But I get it. So I think the less you do it, which would be me, the more uncomfortable it feels sometimes. So I know some people are really good at getting the most out of themselves, and I've been in that space before, but I think it was always supplemented by those types of things that would pop up. And, we always used to say, I train alone, 5 days of the week or whatever, 6 even. But, if you have that one day, that's why, I know we talk about master swim and all that, but I think for that reason alone, sometimes shit like that is good, depending on, you're always going to see better swimmers probably, and whatever the case may be, or going to do, that doing little races, 5Ks, 10Ks, stuff like that, I think is just more better for kind of setting your, thermometer over the right angle and just kind of keeping your mindset with that. And that could be the biggest benefit of all.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for, yes. Am I anti most masters programs? 'Cause they do way too much garbage throughout their workout and less work. Yes, I am. I think most of them are not that great, but once a week, max twice a week, just for the, maybe to push yourself or to see other people and kind of get that boost. I think there's a happy medium there, like where there's groups and there's solo, and then I don't think it should ever be only one or the other. Right? I don't think you should always train alone 24/7 all the time. I think that wears on you. Nor do I think you should always train in a group 24/7 all the time, because at some point you're not doing your own training, you're doing someone else's training. And then you become way too dependent on the group for your external motivation. I think there's a time and place to train solo. I think there's a time and place to utilize the group. I think both have the ability to increase your ability to perform. But I think managing those is not difficult, but I think it takes a little bit of massaging here and there, and realizing that, that's what, again, like when you have athletes come like, hey, do you care if I do this ride with my group? I'm like, no, I don't care. Go for it. We can work around it. And there's never going to be a race where, let's say you don't do as well. I thought, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That was that Saturday night ride with your buddies. No, or that group run on Wednesdays, or that it wasn't. You can always make things up. And if you're consistent, you're consistent. And it's over. We just complicate and overlook a lot of things sometimes when, yes, a lot of what we do is very simple, but a lot of times also, like, there is no, a lot of time there aren't, concrete answers, to the numbers that come out and the effort that we're able to put out. But I think, in the end, as long as you're continuously pushing yourself and you're asking a lot of yourself and you're wanting to do more and not being comfortable and stretch things out and making sure you're not stale and you're not running from a certain interval or a certain type of workout or a certain race distance, like, as long as you're not in that mode of avoidance, you're always kind of just slightly uncomfortable and there's a slightly unnerving piece about things, then yes, I think you're probably in the right place.
Slightly unnerving.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. It's slightly unnerving.
All right.
I like it.
Go get uncomfortable.
Slightly unnerving. That's was a good one. I'll wrap it up. Yeah, we're already 55 minutes. That's good enough for today.
Yeah, it has been for 830 of them.
It's been for 800, almost 840. We'll see you guys Thursday. As always, we love you. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. If you need anything from me, Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
All right, buddy. I'll catch you Thursday.
Thursday.
All right, man.
See you, dude.
See you.